much, Jackson. It's a real honor and privilege to be back here and to be this end of the auditorium instead of that end of the auditorium. And I can tell you, for those of you who are in your first day of your second week of your first semester as architecture students, it was just about as numbing to walk up those steps today to do this as it was the first time I walked up those steps to be a first-year, first semester student in the fall of 1977. So I want to tell you just a little bit about how I'm going to organize this presentation. When I was first asked to speak, I thought, what am I going to talk about? And as I started organizing it, it became really an exercise in what I didn't talk about. So I tried to edit continually up until just a few minutes ago things out so I don't take too long. But what I wanted to really do, when I sat in those seats 25 years ago today, a lot of times there were people my age, 43, 55, 65, who would get up and show a portfolio of their entire career. And I would think, well, what is it going to be like when I get out to do my internship, or what's it going to be like the first year that I'm working? So I'm going to try to really briefly tell you a little bit of the story, starting with my archive internship experience at Woollen Gibson. For those of you who don't know about that firm, Woollen Gibson was the successor firm of a four-generation, what I really think is an architectural dynasty for Indiana, the Woollen firm. Dietrich Woollen founded the firm in the 1850s, and there were four generations of Wollens who built a lot of the buildings that you might know if you're from Indiana, from central Indiana on south. And just really quickly, I'm going to go through a few of the drawings of those that I worked on in the archives. If you can go ahead, Jeff. And Indiana National Bank, which was raised long before most of you were born, not to make way, but because the Indiana National Bank was building a new headquarters building in Tower that you may know in downtown Indianapolis, the 1960s skyscraper. Another project here, the Stutz Bearcat Motor Car Factory, which I think is still existing and may have been converted into apartments. Another view of that. And what really I included these drawings for is that it was in this internship, looking at these drawings, going through them every day, trying to organize and index them, just looking at the raw beauty, really, of these ink on linen drawings that really got me excited again about architecture. Not, of course, that I wasn't excited from design studio. And this is the St. Peter and Paul Cathedral in Indianapolis. Another slide of that, you can just stop here for a minute. So what happened was, later on, after I had come back to Ball State, and then gone and worked for a couple of years in Dallas, Texas, actually, which was a connection from a Ball State classmate of mine in first-year architecture studio. I was really interested in doing my Historic American Building Survey program. I had a family farmhouse that was my great-great-grandfather built in western Indiana, and so I was really interested in that. I worked with George Scarmez, who was running my particular house course at the time. And what happened was, on a repeat visit to Ball State, I just happened to run into George in the hallway. He asked what I was doing and I said, well, I'm just sort of here for the day. He said, why don't you think about coming to Philadelphia? And we talked a little bit more about that. And the next thing I knew, a couple of weeks later, I was on a plane going out to meet with Hein Myers to interview for a job in Philadelphia to restore, I think it's the next slide, that's me now. Next slide. To work on the restoration of what we call the Grand Dame of Broad Street in Philadelphia, the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, which was built in 1904, designed by George Hewitt. And I would spend the next 3.5 years of my career in and about this building. It was the only thing I really worked on for the most part for that 3.5 years. And I'm just going to like to go quickly through a little bit of an overview of this project. The Bellevue Hotel, as I said, was built in 1904, and it was actually doubled in size, I think, in the teens. And the building had failed miserably. Some of you who may be history buffs might know that there was an infestation of Legionnaires' disease in the Bellevue in the 1970s, and the hotel really failed. So our firm restored the building in 1976, and it still didn't work. And again in 1986, when I arrived in Philadelphia, we set out to convert the hotel into a mixed-use facility. And it would be retail at the lower 3 levels going down into the basement, office building here in the center, and hotel, a top boutique hotel atop the building. Next. The building is not really a massive monolith as it looked in the slide, the corner slide. that is an E-shaped plan. And part of the problem with the building as a hotel was that the middle here of the E, which was the light wells, were very, very dark, dingy, created very dark, dingy spaces for the guest rooms. Originally, when the building was built in 1904, people who traveled to Philadelphia and stayed at the Bellevue had servants who came in tow to carry all their trunks. And those are the people who stayed in these. Well, with people paying $3 million, nobody wanted to stay in these rooms. So we set out to reshape the building. We created an office entrance on the main entrance from Broad Street here. We moved the hotel entrance to what was Chancellor Street at the time, sent people up to the 19th floor where they would be received at reception, and then go back down to their hotel rooms. And we created a dual retail entrance from Walnut Street and Broad Street. And at the time we did this project, it opened, I think, in 1989. Walnut Street was a very seedy, this part of Walnut Street was a relatively seedy shopping street. It is now the premier shopping street in Philadelphia, and I think the Bellevue served as an anchor for that. The intervention in the 1950s had looked like on the facade for any of you who are historic preservation students, typical 1950s. Next slide. In 1976, the cleaning up of the entrance of the building. And then this is really the work, and I'm just going to go through this project really quickly, of the intervention of an atrium into this old hotel. This was cutting through all the structure to put it in escalators. This is the development of that space. This is what it looked like at the end and still does. It's a very successful retail space. Up on the 12th floor, if you remember in the section, one of the things that we had to do was cut out the middle of the building to create what we called a conservatory space, which was really an interior atrium, so that those dark, dingy rooms wouldn't be dark and dingy anymore, and they could actually rent the rooms or sell the rooms. And we had to fill in the floors for the offices. So this is showing after we had started cutting the floors out, we put in 4 massive columns to support next a historic ballroom that was located atop on the 19th floor. And if we can go ahead to the next slide, another view of the Bellevue Conservatory. This is at the 12th floor of the building. And this is the ballroom on top of the new space, and that's after the restoration of the ballroom. This is the exterior of the top floor of the building. This is the addition that was built in the teens. There were 2 small ballrooms on the top floor, and when we sent people up, we sent them into one of these spaces as the reception area, tea room, and then the other one, if you can go next. This is before the unveiling of the interior of these spaces. They'd actually fallen into disuse and been in disuse basically for about 15 years. We discovered great views, a lot of nice ornamentation, terrible acoustics, unfortunately, but they made very nice public spaces for the hotel, which is now the Park Hyatt Philadelphia. Next. And that's the Bellevue. Just for interest's sake, that's Michael Graves' sporting club on top of the Bellevue parking garage to the left. Just a little bit about our firm. Vitetta was founded in 1967 by a man whose name is Frank Vitetta, and the firm spent its early years doing a multitude of things, but a lot of school work, and a lot of the work of Vitetta was regionally based in and around Philadelphia, and actually a lot of the work was being architect of record for design firms that would come in from outside of Philadelphia. And you will find when you get out into the profession that there are a lot of different types of firms. And over the years, we've really moved from being the people who put other people's buildings together to being the people who are doing the design. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're organized into studios, design studios, that each have a specific market type or project building type, so that we have people basically who have some kind of expertise in that building type, and then we move teams around from studio to studio. So the first one where I started was historic preservation. I keep going back to historic preservation. And just a little sampling of our projects. Independence Hall, we did the master plan for Independence National Park. This is another shot, aerial view, with the Mitchell-Jurgala Bell building, Independence Liberty Bell, which is no longer going to be there if you've been following that. The restoration of the tower and the weather vane, another slide of that, with great view from up there. And moving along, the Academy of Music is another client of ours for over a quarter of a century. And recently, with the new construction of Vignoli's Kimmel Center in Philadelphia to house the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Academy of Music has now become the primary venue for the Pennsylvania Ballet and the Opera Company of Philadelphia. So we've done some different kinds of interventions in this building in the last 2 years, including raising the roof and putting in a new orchestra pit and all new back of the house equipment. That's the corridor after the restoration of the public access corridor. Another project we were architect of record for is the Pennsylvania Convention Center. TVS&A was the design architect, but part of that project was the restoration of the Reading Terminal train shed, which is located immediately above the Reading Terminal Farmers Market. And our intervention was to create these ballroom spaces and this massive meeting and party space atop the market in what had formerly been where the trains came in. The Trenton War Memorial is a project that probably very few people know about. It's a wonderful building in the Italian Renaissance Revival style. This building was built in, I believe it was 1934, and it's actually a state-of-the-art concert hall. This is, of course, after restoration. It is the home of the Trenton Symphony and the second home of the New Jersey Symphony Orchestras. Another one of our studios, healthcare and science. I don't know what else to say, but it's healthcare work. Other than the trend in recent years in healthcare work has been away from hospital buildings and to ambulatory care facilities. As you probably know, if you need a procedure, you go in, you get it, you leave that day, and you don't really stay in the hospital unless if it's a dire situation. This is Jersey Shore Ambulatory Care Facility in Neptune, New Jersey. Another shot of that building. We did master planning for St. Tammany Parish in Louisiana. We have offices in 6 states in the country, so we do work all over the place, although most of our work tends to be in the East Coast. This is showing an addition and a chapel to the front of the building with a new public entrance and administration wing. This is a VA hospital in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. The client requested to have something that looked really different, and they were happy. They got something different. This is their existing building in the background. Another area of work, justice facilities, which include both courthouses and jails and detention facilities. This is the Philadelphia Criminal Justice Center. It's one of several buildings that house the courts in Philadelphia. This is the interior of the court building. This is a courtroom, and right up here is, through that window, a great view of Philadelphia City Hall, which is the largest masonry-bearing building in the United States, I think, in fact, in the world. That is another one of our continuing restoration projects. It probably will not be entirely restored in any of our lifetimes. Again, a view in the foreground. This is the convention center. The Reading Terminal Shed is over here behind me. This is the Criminal Justice Center and City Hall Tower beyond. The Bellevue is back over here out of the picture, just to give you an idea of the landscape in Philadelphia. Yes, in fact, there are jails as a part of this portfolio. This is the Salem County Jail in Salem County, New Jersey. Salem County is a very poor county that's very tax-rich. The Salem County nuclear reactor is located there, and so they built a 532 state-of-the-art, state-quality prison. And this is the interior of one of the day rooms of that, and the next shot's the exterior. Their idea being that they could rent up to 200 cells to the state. Educational facilities, which represents probably our biggest component of projects. Vitetta has designed over 500 schools representing $1 billion in construction. And I'm just going to show you a few of these. This is one of our most recent planning projects. It's in Western Australia. It is a campus-type school. This is the Western Province, which is a desert. And the concept was community-based education, and the school is a community center. Just some conceptual studies of that school. And then a more typical school in New Jersey. This is the Edward J. Patton Elementary School in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Part of the era of the mega elementary school, which thankfully we're seeing that era, that trend changing. These are the kindergarten rooms. There were 6 in this building. Most of our schools, that bulk of that portfolio was built in this mega school era. This is a typical classroom. This is actually another school, the Hess School. And this is Bass River School in addition to a 1970s sort of little pseudo something, I don't know, vernacular colonial building. And we can keep going here. And one of our most recently completed schools, an urban school in New Brunswick, New Jersey. It's only a few miles from New York City. This was part of actually a development authority project where our client was not the school district, the first one we've done, but a developer. And if we can go through that, this is a queuing space, the main lobby of the school. This is looking down into that space, auditorium. Very few of our schools actually have auditoriums, full, especially elementary schools. Computer lab, typical of schools now, and not atypical television studio for an elementary school in New Brunswick, and the students returning from some outing. I'm going to slow down a little bit now and show you four relatively recent projects of mine. This one is back also to historic preservation. I was the principal in charge of the interior restoration of this building. Hy Myers, again, was the principal in charge of the entire project. And it is the, Jackson had mentioned the Pennsylvania Capitol Annex. It's now called the Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building. At the time we started the project, it was called the Capitol Annex. It is the oldest building on the Capitol complex, which is about, I think, 4 square blocks just in the immediate Capitol complex portion, and probably about 10 square blocks in entirety. This is the only building that survived a terrible fire at the turn of the century. It did receive a lot of smoke damage and interior damage, but it was restored at that time, and then we restored it again. This is after the exterior restoration, and I'm going to show you just a little bit about the building and what it was and how we converted it. Initially, this building was built as the annex to a significant state capitol building in Pennsylvania to house the governor's offices, the State Museum, and the State Library. The front portion of the building, this was the view you saw here looking into the building. The front portion of the building was the governor's offices on the first 2 floors. There was a grand staircase here that went up to the State Museum, which was a room about this size here. Where's my pointer? In this area. And the library was this part of the annex, almost an annex of the annex. And so what we did, there was about 27,000 square feet of usable space. It was very, very inefficient. Over time, it had been used for many different things. The museum and the library had moved out, and it was the desire of the legislature to move representatives into this very, very handsome building and to try to consolidate and rearrange the research analysts for, at that time, the controlling party. It's still, until next week, the controlling party in Pennsylvania, the Republican research analysts, which were all over the building. So we moved them out, and we converted the building. We made this part into office suites for the representatives, and we converted the back portion into offices for the research analysts, and we also converted the basement and the attic, which had not been used before as usable space, into research analysts' offices. And then this middle portion, this part that was the size of this room, we converted into the research library, and I'll show you some slides now if we can go to the next one. This is the before of the entrance lobby. The scagliola had been deteriorated, it had fallen off, and then eventually been removed and painted over up at the top portion. There had been several different unfortunate incidents here. This was an intervention that was not historically correct. And fortunately, the doors were all intact, although any of you have seen some old houses around here in Indiana where the varnish has darkened and darkened and darkened for 90 years. It was blackened. So if we could go to the next slide, this is after we restored the space, which was done using historic paint analysis for the ceiling, putting back scagliola at the top and restoring the scagliola all around the building. And if those of you who are in your first day of your first week, that is really, it's like a plaster material that's impregnated with color all the way through, and polishing the marble here on the floor. Another view of that. Is this one a better one? Ah, much better. Okay, next.
This was originally the State Museum for the state of Pennsylvania when this building was built. And there had been a rather unfortunate intervention here with the addition of a computer room at the advent of the computer era. There was a big server in here that was the whole room, basically. And next slide is another view of this room. This is the door into that room that you were seeing the top of. And the next slide is a color version of what this room was, seeing the very sensitive treatment to the historic paint scheme. And so we restored that room, and originally when this was the State Museum, this entire wall was the home to the Rothermill painting of the Battle of Gettysburg, and we tried to barter with the State Museum to get it back, and they wouldn't let us. Ultimately, they kept saying yes and then no, and so what we finally did was reproduce part of the painting, and it's located here, and we were able to get the statue of Lincoln back into this space. And one of the parts, if we could just back up for 1 second, you can just hit up. Great. One of the things that this project required was research of the historic period furnishings and designing historic period furnishings of the Victorian period that were appropriate to this building. The Victorian era, it wasn't my favorite era, but it was the assignment, and so that's what we did. So all of these light fixtures were from either something that we had found, all the furniture in the building, or photographs of things that were from the period. There was we did hours, days and days and days of research, and there was very, very little available other than a few photographs of the building, because of course a lot of the photographs had been destroyed in the fire. So next. This is that area that was the governor's offices over time. Again, it was sort of misused. This was a photograph I took right before we started. And so that is, yes, how it looked in 1997. And again, we had to intervene with systems-type furniture, but that looked like it sort of had belonged, and design the carpets, window treatments, all kinds of things like that. Next. This was the basement space, which had become mechanical space. We had to convert this and make it into usable office, which actually nobody wanted to be in this space during design, and everybody wanted to be in this space when we were finished. Next. This was the State Library originally. Some unfortunate interventions here, another room built out into the middle of the space. All of the original stack areas, which were double stacked with self-supporting shelves at this level and another set of self-supporting shelves at this level. Any of you who've been to the main library in Indianapolis, those shelves are the same type of self-supporting shelves in the original part of the building. And so what we did was try to restore, again, the sense of the space, put back, based upon historic photographs and a few drawings that we had, the same type of division, organization that had been there when these were stack areas. Next. This was the reception room for the governor at one time. And again, if we can move forward, we turned this into a hearing room for the representatives. And this was the attic, converted into open office space. And another view of the exterior of the building after the cleaning and restoration. Another project, there were a lot of projects going on at that time. Another project that was contemporary of that one started in 1997 looking for space, and we finally found space, I guess it was in 1998, in what had been the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. It was decommissioned about then by the Congress, and we found a building that we absolutely loved and did some schematic plans for it, and then about the time we went to sign the papers, the city of Philadelphia decided that no, that was the building they were going to use as the cruise ship terminal. And it was the only building in the Navy Yard that was next to water deep enough to bring cruise ships in, because they're very deep-bottomed boats. And so we had to go to our second choice, which was this building, Building 101, which had been the Marine barracks for the Navy Yard. The one nice thing about this building is it sits on the parade ground, half of the former parade ground. It has 350 windows, so there's not a place in the building. Well, there's one place I'll show you later that doesn't have windows. And we restored the exterior of the building. There were a couple of interventions that we did. One was here. the National Park Service and SHPO allowed us to put a new entrance here at the back of the building from our parking lot. There had obviously been an alteration here. Another change that we were allowed to make was these 4 windows, and these 4 windows were windows into latrines. And you'll see a little bit that this was a great space, and we decided to make this a common space for everyone, gutted it, no longer latrines, and we lowered these windows to capture incredible views, panoramic views of the skyline of Philadelphia. And so this is after our intervention here, putting in a new entrance in the back of the building. Next. Close-up of that. We can keep going. This was the front porch that before that used the first slide I had of this project. And this was the main door in the center of the building, not too ceremonial. The Park Service again allowed us to create this as a main entrance, just a small projection out onto the porch. We leveled the porch so that it was accessible entrance at the back of the building. And this allows us to have staff out here for parties. We have a picnic every Thursday during the summer. And next slide, you can see from the porch the decommissioned warships beyond. The plan of the building is sort of an I plan with this attachment here in the center. The attachment that had been at the top 2 floors, the latrines. At the lower level had been conference space. And this is the basement plan, which became our basic utility floor. We left the 2 outer bays for storage. We had spent a lot of money on storage. If you're an architect, you have to keep things for a long time. And we put a gym in here, a small gym, because people work lots of hours, and people kept asking for that. And we created a copy center here, the copy center that didn't get the handouts collated and stapled out there for you. But here in the center of the building was the place that we had to add some vertical circulation. The building had a stair tower here at the south end and a stair tower here at the north end, both of which were open all the way from the basement to the 3rd floor. But it did not have an elevator and did not have a third means of communication. So we wanted to, next slide, bring people in both from the front, and we call this the yellow brick road. It literally is a yellow brick road in front of our building, and from the parking area, which is where most people enter the building. Have a control point so that our receptionist who sits here can greet visitors, collect people who are trying to wander in and wander around the studios who maybe shouldn't be, and then create open studios throughout the building. And the studios are very repetitive. But because we were architects, everybody wanted to create their space their own way. And so what we did was we created a module and said, okay, within certain limitations, you can lay out your space however you'd like. And so there are some subtle differences. This is the Historic Preservation Studio. They have their own little library. They have larger side tables because the old drawings are so enormous. A lot of those ink on linen drawings that I was talking about earlier. This was originally the library and interior design studio with interior design library back there. And now we've added some of our education studio into this suite. And at this level of this part of the building, this was conference and meeting rooms, and so the walls weren't in the right places, so we gutted it, but we kept that as our conference and meeting space. And in this bridge, stacked on all 4 floors, are toilets. And if we can go on to the next slide. This was the interior of the main door. And so, again, we had to do a lot of, this was the area with the most work in terms of removals, cutting through that floor and inserting an elevator, a stair, semicircular stair, a little cutout at our reception area. Keep going. This created a place for us to have a gallery for our work. This is the reception desk if you're coming in from the parking lot. And this is one of the historic stairs. And one of the things that we decided we wanted to do was keep this feeling that when you're coming up or down the stairs, especially down, you can see out through the porches and have these wonderful vistas of the parade ground and see out to the ships. And so we spent a little bit of extra money and put sprinklers in here on both sides of the glass, and we had to retrofit the railings because the gold railing is the historic railing, and put this whole enclosure in all the way up. Next. This is a typical design studio before, and this is a typical design studio now. The plan, if you remember, was organized with sort of corridors. We called them boulevards. That nomenclature has been used quite a bit in recent years. We created a space here, again, to display more work. One of the things that we suffered in our old office was there was no place to show work. It was all work and no place to show it. So we really tried to accommodate that. This is another studio with one of the other things that we were very concerned about was in the teaming and reteaming of projects, being able to move people around easily without taking 2 days or 3 days to move someone. And so most of the furniture is on wheels like this. So if you moved to be on a different team, we literally just roll the furniture around. And we weren't really sure if that was one of those things that was a great idea and good in theory, or if it would really work. But it really has worked. We do that a lot. And this is another, oh, this is the conference room before. And I'm sorry, this is not the same view, but this is the conference room after. And this is the second floor plan. Again, we have studios. The difference in this floor plan being that we have a porch, because somewhere along the line, we think in the 1920s, because of the photographs of the building, the history of the photographs, that this porch was enclosed. So going back to those photographs, the Park Service let us keep the porches and put windows in that were appropriate to that intervention, the first intervention when these porches were enclosed, not the 1960s one. This is the interior of that porch, which we used for non-studio spaces, things like marketing, next slide, conference room. This is a before of the center conference room in the plan, and after of that room. This is the bridge space, which was only the sinks, the lavatories. We were able to accommodate the entire men's room on this side and the women's room on the right side. Next slide, and this is what it looks like after. And this is the third floor. Again, we have a porch here, the various studios, open studios here. This one is really quite different. This is our healthcare studio, and this is part of it. The healthcare studio wanted to be very different. And we have our toilets here in the middle. Here we have our resource library for the entire firm, in addition to the interiors library and the historic preservation library. Our chief spec writer sits here. Our construction administration director sits here. We have business development and administrative offices here, and we actually now rent this space. And just backing up 1 minute from this wonderful photograph, this space is the space I was talking about where we lowered the windows. And this was a space that we talked about and debated about quite a lot because we wanted to have a place to have lunch, have food service parties, the logical place being the basement where the kitchen would most logically be. But you will see in a minute that this was really too good to pass up, and it was also too good to be proprietary and give to any one studio and not to everybody. So we created a cafe, sort of lounge space here. The cafe tables are on this side with the view. This side is a lounge area. That's the south side of the building. Little bar tables here. And then our kitchen servery here, which we have a food service that prepares a lunch every day and breakfast. And these pieces of furniture, like our other furniture, are all on casters. They all unplug, and they can be moved around and made into bars in the corners of the rooms for our parties. Next. This is what the room looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. Those are the windows with a view. Next. And the lounge side of this. And of course, we have to have a television here behind this armoire for weekend football games. This is the third floor porch, the flip view of the after next, which is where our business development group is. These are the people that send out proposals. A little conference for that, and the twilight view of the building as it looks now. A little blurry. At the same time that these two projects were going on, we had an interview for a new set of projects with the Free Library of Philadelphia. And I just have to give you, how am I doing on time? I'm okay. I just have to give you a little bit of history about the Free Library of Philadelphia, because if you're from a place like I was, from Danville, Illinois, you think library, okay, it's a nice little building. The Free Library of Philadelphia has had 49 branch libraries at that time, now 50. They have 3 regional libraries that are each about 70,000, 80,000 square feet, and a large central library, which they now plan to double in size at least, if not triple, and restore the original building. And the Free Library, I guess maybe a couple of years before '97, had gotten a grant from the William Penn Foundation to refurbish, basically, all of their buildings and to create spaces for children and families and to add computers. And so they started renovating the buildings, and they sort of started on their own, and they started hiring architects. They hired about 6 different architects, and they had renovated 30 buildings, and they were pretty much universally dissatisfied with all of the results they had, except that they'd gotten the computers in the buildings and they were clean. And so they decided to start over again, and they went out with an RFP to about 100 firms. About 80 replied, and they shortlisted to 3, and I was fortunate enough to be hired to do these 3 projects, and then ultimately be rehired 5 more times to renovate the remaining 18 branches of their system. They have one that still is so disastrous that they haven't figured out what they're going to do with it. So I'm just going to really quickly go through these. These were really, they were refurbishments bordering on renovations. This was the interior of a branch called the Bustleton Avenue branch, built in the 1960s, familiar site. The after, remembering that the focus of these projects was really children and families, creating a space that was fun for children and welcoming for all. Another shot of the entry of this building. Next. Very low budgets on these projects. Next. This was a Carnegie branch in North Philadelphia. This is the most ethnically, racially, culturally diverse neighborhood in the city of Philadelphia. It is also the poorest neighborhood in the city of Philadelphia. And this is the after. The theme that they wanted to convey was that we are all one, all races, and so we tried to do that in the architectural artwork. Another Carnegie branch, we did 4. 4 of the 18 were Carnegies. That's a T-shaped plan. Many of you have been in those buildings. I think actually Muncie Public is a T-shaped Carnegie building. And this is the after of that. Unfortunately, we had to close this window to install an elevator to make the building accessible. Next. This is the smallest in the system. It's about a 4,700 square foot building in West Philadelphia near Drexel University. And actually, if you could back up, this is one of my favorite of these before and afters. The poor library had no place to put their ladder, and this was their means of egress, secondary means of egress, which was totally cluttered with boxes. So a very simple solution to this was to next add on, go up, and they now store all their materials there, and this hides the ladder, which still sits in the same place. And so I think that's my last slide of the Free Library of Philadelphia. One of the things that I tried to do back in, I guess it was 1995, when we were talking about growth strategies for our firm, was I saw that in our portfolio we had a lot of buildings that had libraries. And I had a lot of experience working with that portion of all those projects, and I loved the client type, and quite frankly, all of the clients I had in libraries. And so I said, well, look, why don't we create a library design studio? And so the Free Library was a great fit, only not even a year, much more than a year and a half later to get those projects. And one thing led to another, and ultimately I would be asked to enter a competition for the Jacksonville Library. But before that, a little bit of the history of that, I went to a conference in Copenhagen, Denmark. It was the AIA International Conference on Public Policy. I thought there couldn't be a more perfect conference for me to attend as a representative of our firm, since we do all public type buildings, than a conference on public policy and architecture. So the conference was held here at the Royal Library in Copenhagen, a building I suggest you visit if you're ever there. And something happened with my flight into Copenhagen, and the flight was very, very late, and so I literally ran to get on the bus. And as I walked up the steps, the first person on the bus, peering over and smiling at me, was Charlie Sappenfield. And so it was great to see Charlie and hang out with him, your Dean Emeritus, the founding dean of this College of Architecture. And we hung out for the rest of that week, and I lived in this building, as we all did, for the conference, and got to know it. And really, the more I was there, the more I thought highly of the building. And so when 8 months later, I got a phone call in my office and asked if I would be interested in participating in this competition, I said sure, and then the next thing I found out was that there was some unusual criteria. The criteria was in part, that we had to have designed over $100 million in libraries. That I could deal with, we could do that. But we also had to have designed one 150,000 square foot library. We couldn't do that. Hardy Holtzman, who's coming later, they've designed a number of libraries that big. They were one of our competitors. But I couldn't. So I tried to decide who would I invite to join me in this venture. And the first person that I thought of was, well, what about the architect who designed this building? I didn't think any American architects who had designed a building that large really would need me. So this is an interior of the Royal Library. I sent an email to Morten Schmidt, who's the principal of Schmidt, Hammer & Lawson in Aarhus, Denmark, and got up the next morning at 4 o'clock, called him. He answered the phone and said, you know, I've just read your email this morning, and we had a special meeting about it, and yes, that was it. And so the next 6 months we spent collaborating on the Jacksonville competition. And this is the, if you can hold here for just a second, this is the final design solution, the nighttime rendering of our entry for the Jacksonville competition. We did not win the competition. We were ranked #1 by 2 of the 5 selection committee members, by both the library director and the engineer for the library. The city attorney, city treasurer, and purchasing manager ranked Mr. Stern #1, and so his building is being built. But nevertheless, I like to share this project with you. When we started the project, still doing okay on time, I guess. When we started the project, we had an orientation meeting in Jacksonville, and the library director got up and he gave us all a talk. All of the competitors were there in the room, and he said, started his talk by saying, give me a box with the sides greater than the width. And there was a pause. And then he said, I want my library to celebrate the books. I want to come in and see the books and know that you are in a library. Know that I'm in a library. I do not want to see a grand staircase, a set of escalators, a set of elevators. And that is what we took as our design directive, our team. And so from that point, we took the, I think, 800-page program of this 291,000 square foot library and 600 space parking garage back. I took it back to Philadelphia. They took it back to Denmark. And Morten had a team in Copenhagen who broke the program apart, literally, ripped it all apart into different pages, went through just as you would when you get your program from your professor, and did an analysis, started doing blocking drawings of the square footages. And we didn't have a lot of time to design this big building. So they did all of that. I started reading through it from the perspective of a library and library organization. And about a week later, I flew over to Copenhagen, and we spent about 2 weeks going through all the conceptual design of the building, trying to organize it. At the end of that, basically 2 weeks, we're about 4 weeks into the competition now, we had maybe 3 concepts that seemed viable. There were things about each one that worked, that were good, nothing perfect about any of them. But my time was up. 3 days later, we had our first workshop in Jacksonville. I couldn't really change my flight. So I was on a train, and I kept thinking about those 3 scenarios, and I thought, you know, there's just something not right about any of these. And so I scribbled a sketch, and when I got to my hotel in Germany, which was where I was flying out of to come back, I tried to fax it. The fax machine did not work. It would not work. And so I eventually, before I left Germany, called and left 3 voicemails to Morten. And 3 days later, they showed up basically with everything changed, incorporating all the stuff that I talked about in the voicemail, which came out of this very, very crude scribble sketch. If you can move to the next slide. Whoops, I'm sorry. Maybe move to the next slide. Let me back up. I got them out of order. That was it. And basically, the plan of the library stayed this way throughout the entire competition. One of the problems that we had in our concepts was the circulation. The site, remember, we've been asked for a rectangle with sides greater than the box, but then we got an L-shaped site. This building here is a former Western Union Telegraph building that was to be retained and converted. It's already being converted into what they're calling the Museum of Modern Art in Jacksonville. And so it was very, very difficult to create a rectangular box, which is good organizationally as a library, on this site. So one of the things that I thought was, well, what we needed to do was move, we had the vertical circulation over here, move the vertical circulation out over to the south side of the building. It would also create some of a thermal capture of all of the heat gain in Florida on the southern exposure and insulate the building a little bit from that. So maybe if we can back up now to the slide. Sorry, I got these out of order. This is the site. This is downtown Jacksonville. This is where the building is. The building faces a park called Hemming Plaza, which is the main city square for downtown Jacksonville. And it was proposed as part of the mayor's plan for Jacksonville to create a pocket park over here to the east side. This is east, north, south, and west. The opposite side of Hemming Plaza is home to the new GSA Design Excellence Federal Courthouse, which coincidentally we're doing the interiors for. So I'd hope to do both sides of the plaza, but at any rate, moving on to the next two slides. What the plan that resulted was to have this visual corridor or gallery space from Hemming Plaza, which is already here, to the future Pocket Park, which is here. And part of the reason why this was so important in our concept was that this is actually Main Street, and historically had been the main street in Jacksonville. What happened some point, probably in the 50s or 60s, is that this street was made single directional traffic, one way going this way, and Laura Street, which is over here on the Hemming Plaza side, was made one way going the other direction. And this is actually the direction down to the harbor, if any of you've been to Jacksonville. So we really wanted to give them the opportunity to have this link, create this corridor, again have the vertical core here, and have our rectangular box of a library right here. Main entrance, special entrance. The parking garage is up here. Another piece of this was having a bridge from the parking garage over into the building. There's a staff parking garage at the lowest level, which you enter here. And one of the requirements that was very difficult in this urban setting was to have a drive-through window for the library. There was only one place that, after a lot of research, that was the right gradation for a drive-through window, which was right here. And that drove a few things, but we tried not to let that overpower our design. This is just a breakaway of some of the final schematics. Again, this vertical circulation, which is limestone. The Danes call it sandstone. The other facade, the north facade that is, and then this flanking of the rectangle with this projection and the curved glass wall. Next. And with that, actually, I need to, if we're still okay on time, I want to show you a virtual tour. Let me just... The site had four, I guess I'll stand over here so where I'm supposed to be. No, this is fine. The site had originally two historic buildings here and a historic building here in addition to the Museum of Modern Art. And the city was going through a real quandary as to whether or not to keep them and to give us design directive to keep them or not to keep them. This building was an old furniture store and furniture warehouse. It was 11 stories, and it was part of the Renaissance of Jacksonville, which was a lot of Chicago-style architecture. And so a lot of those buildings had been destroyed, and there was a lot of sentiment about keeping this building, although, as you can see, less so in our design, but more so in the competitors, as it turned out. It really didn't work very well in creating a new library on this site. Our decision was to retain only the facades on the Monroe Street side, which was the south side of the building. This is that Western Union Telegraph building, which was and is being retained on the site. So coming around to the western side of the building, this is Hemming Plaza here, and part of our design concept was to try to draw people into the library. A lot of the libraries that have been built in the last 10 years, the large libraries in the United States, do anything but that. And it was clear from Ken's comments and all of the other comments besides the ones I shared with you that that was paramount to the program of this building. And so we stepped the entrance back into this space, which provides some shelter from the sun for the cafe function that is flanking to the left, the entrance of the building, which we had one liberty of creating a two-story cafe bookshop so that we could capture people coming in from the bridge, from the parking garage, to that retail space, as well as coming in from Hemming Plaza into the retail space. Here, if you're coming into the building, in this scenario, information over here on the left. I'll show you the plans in a couple of minutes. Circulation here. And then you move down, remembering at Hemming Plaza you enter at grade, and then you have to go down a level to be at grade level on the Main Street side. It's a full story difference from side to side of the site. So it actually became an asset to our design, I think, or we tried to make it an asset. To the left would be auditorium and meeting rooms, and then you move through and out to the space. And actually, because of time, I think I'm going to stop this when I have another tour later. And thanks. Keep going with the plans. So continuing to walk through the building, again back on Hemming Plaza. If we can go ahead to the next slide. Drawing people in, again, part of the reason of extending this portion of the building out was to accommodate the cafe and the retail space, and then also to provide a place on the upper floors to really show off the books, both during the day and at night. Draw people in again. This is the entrance into the public space of the library, the vertical circulation core on the right, going down again to Main Street level. The development of that was a little sketchy before, of the auditorium and meeting room spaces. Next. And this is the Main Street level plan, auditorium, meeting rooms, small conference rooms, parking garage here, toilets here, a secondary water feature here. There's one upstairs, a computer lab here, and back of the house space. We also had you can leave it here. We have the staff circulation and workspace here at the north side of the building throughout, except the fourth floor, which had a larger circulation floor. Here is the cafe in this plan, Hemming Plaza coming into the building, down the stairs. Idea here was also that this space could serve for performances, for any kind of public gathering. Moving into the library, this is Popular Materials. This is the Teen Center. It was important that the Teen Center be visually somewhat accessible to circulation staff. And this is a fairly large children's area here with a children's program room here in the southeast corner of the building. The service entrance for trucks, which was to be shared with the MoMA. Next. This is the periodicals and reference floor, second floor. Again, staff area here with condensed shelving here. Pretty much the same circulation. The bridge is across into the information hubs here. Next. Next. The third floor, which was, is this third floor? This is fourth floor, sorry. I think we maybe have skipped one. Third floor, which is, has special collections. This is the Florida History Room here. And staff, again, we can go ahead and go on to the next floor. The fourth floor, one other program change that was made, this was made by another competitor, I am sure it was Mr. Stern, was to add a reading room. And so we placed our reading room here, cantilevered out into the gallery and cantilevered out onto Monroe Street. And this is a very, very dense floor of stacks, but that was the program. That wasn't our idea. Next. The fifth floor was to house the administration, and so we organized the administration after quite a bit of discussion with the library into management and public relations, I think human resources here, and other more back-of-the-house operations here. A cafe, lounge type space, not quite like our cafe with hot food, but back here, which next has access onto these roof gardens. One thing that hurt us a lot in the deliberations was this water feature, which we debated a lot whether to use, and we left it in next. And just we could go really quickly through these sections. You can just keep going. This is the circulation, again, from the parking garage, the horizontal circulation into the various parts of the building, which I already went through in plan. Next, the longitudinal section, if we can just keep going through this. Actually, if you can back up to that one, I think this probably helps to demonstrate the level change from Hemming Plaza to the Main Street level. Okay, go. Just keep rolling through these. Auditorium spaces, main level, reference, special collections, and up here, administration. We had some alternate schemes where we would cut through the floor so you could actually have some views from these sort of massive collections areas through the building. And this elevation, which is the north elevation, we really took our cue from this building in terms of scale and rhythm. This is, except for the fourth floor, this is all administrative staff space at the north side of the building. It was in our concept, that was a debate we had quite a bit, because Northern Light is the best for libraries, but it just functionally didn't really work out to not have them here. Artwork on the bridge, colored glass, stained glass, some kind of art that would be incorporated into the architecture. The rooftop gardens, which would have sculptural art as part of the landscape. A water feature here at the main entrance, and then that other one that I showed you at the Main Street entrance, which is the secondary entrance. We talked about an LCD art wall here. That was very popular with the library. And the reading hall would be decorated with either murals or some kind of colored glass as well. And the children's room would also have a considerable amount of art, be surrounded, really, surround sound with art, if you will. And let me go ahead and show that. It's about 6 minutes long.
You need to get out of that.
Yeah, I need to close this down. This was from our other workshop, and this was really a study in some alternative solutions to the basic same building design. We had a lot of little things that we experimented with, like penetrating this, the south facade, doing some things with the roof garden, how we were going to treat this above the roof above the gallery. The major thing that we were exploring here was what if we didn't enclose the box of the library with glass but left it open. We had to do a lot of research about code and whether that would really be viable. The library was concerned about dust and sound, of course, so we went back in the final presentation to glass enclosure, which caused some consternation also on the part of the cost estimator, which you can read about. There are handouts out here about this project. Stan Collier did a great job of saying everything that I might like to say and reporting it very accurately. And there's also an article out here about our office, if you'd like to take those on your way out. This is the children's program space. This is looking in from Main Street into the building. Here again, the children's program space cantilevered out. You can start to see the development of the main reading halls without glass enclosure. We changed the louvers from horizontal to vertical louvers for a lot of practical reasons, and we started to show the water garden feature here. We did scrap the idea of having vines growing up cables. Nobody seemed to understand that at the library, so I'm not sure that we were on the right track there anyway. But here again, you start to see the idea, at least, of escalators in this vertical core. The bridge work across, connecting into the public areas and the circulation areas of the library. This is another cantilever, which is the reading hall here. and the fourth floor reading area here. Another view into that space. We experimented with opening this portion of the building up, a bit of a structural challenge, but it really did break the corner away just enough to not enclose the space totally. That was pretty well received. Again, coming in to the library here with information and circulation on the left. A lot of these views of the vines growing up, the cables that went away. This is being inside the vertical core and looking out into the gallery. That being down on the Main Street level, again coming up to Hemming Plaza. Is that my phone ringing? This is the children's program room where we did surround art. We didn't show this in the final presentation. Different ideas about how we might do that with floor materials, wall materials. And this is the LCD screen that was one of the single most popular ideas with the library staff. The idea being that we could use this for art. You could scan anything and put the art up there. The library liked the notion of playing videos of children's story hours and maybe even showing CNN. That wasn't quite what we had in mind, but that was okay. And I'll go ahead and head over here, and this is just about over. Go back to the slides. We also talked about a lot of special furniture. In addition to our working with a lot of creating historic furniture, Schmidhammer and Lawson creates a lot of modern furniture, which is quite beautiful. This is furniture from the Royal Library and was what we had in mind in a lot of the reading areas, the computer terminals. We could have never done this in Jacksonville, Florida, but it's a nice idea. And so if we can go to the next slide. We also gave them 4 alternate layouts for the 4th floor reading area, which was that very, very packed reading floor. One was to simply not develop this portion of it. Remember, this is the only floor that didn't have administrative staff. And another one, option B, was to just do some cut-throughs with those views and vistas through the building. Another was to create little gathering spaces, and another was just not to fill it with all those stacks. Next. This is the parking garage with our garden. Retail is about 25,000 square feet here around the building, so we put our entrance in the center. Next. Again, this is the next level with the bridge across. We had some light wells for natural light to feed down into the parking spaces. And we really tried with this gradation of the street to create a retail scape that stepped down along that, which was the Duval Street facade of the parking garage. And here's the bridge again. Another elevation of that side of the building. And just a few more views looking from the Pocket Park side of the building, which is the eastern side if you're standing looking at the building. Next, close up in to the final version of the design. Going inside the building, auditorium and meeting rooms here. Next, going up onto the Hemming Plaza level, cafe out here, Hemming Plaza across the street, water feature over here. This is the GSA building here, the new federal courthouse by KBJ, I think it is. And this is our day view of the front of the library from Hemming Plaza, with some liberty to Hemming Plaza that we took. It's not really like that over here. And the night view of the library. And our most recent library project, one that is going to be built, hopefully it goes out to bid next week, a little library in the suburbs of Philadelphia, in a community that's been in existence for over 300 years and has never had a library. And this was the schematic floor plan, which has not changed a lot. Similar in its organization in some ways to Jacksonville, actually. But you come in the middle, library to the right, public meeting area to the left, conference rooms, meeting rooms, a cafe space here. This is part of most new library programs to have a cafe space. This is the children's area, which is about half, really, of the public circulation floor of the library. A children's program room here for arts, crafts, story hour, summer reading programs, a pre-K area here with easy readers around it. These areas both have higher roofs, and the general collections here. We put both the reading areas for the children's and the adult primarily along the north facade, again the northern light for reading, and some with some study rooms along the western facade. And we have the periodicals collection here, reference, young adult, which is a big part of libraries now, young adult teen, fairly large space for them here, and then the workspace, staff volunteer lounge, and all the utility spaces here, circulation. And this is, again, popular materials, first thing you see when you come in. The site of this library is very different than Jacksonville. It's a suburban sort of type of community, an old town, but in a suburban type of development or community at this point. This is a main street, Babylon Road. This is a dirt road now, Jarrett Road, which is paved maybe this far. There is an elementary school up here, and there is a suburban housing development in this location, and this is all forest this way. The library committee had started working on this building in 1983, trying to get a library for this town. And one of the things that they really wanted to see was a library that was right on the street. And this town has a lot of light industry, and the zoning would not allow that siting to occur. So we moved the building the closest it possibly could be to the street, and it ended up somewhere about here. So the town gave us a variance to move it this close to the street, but not any closer, with a potential expansion out here, which is getting pretty close to the houses over here. In an earlier incarnation of this site plan, we had the building, well, if it shuts down, it shuts down. We had the building oriented the other way, the rectangle, and this made more sense, but they latched onto that, and so be careful what you show. But nevertheless, there's a bus turnaround here for dropping children off from the other schools that aren't next door, and you can walk right around and into the front door, and then the parking, 150 spaces surrounding the building. Next. This is the final plan that's going out to bid next week. Very, very similar. Really no significant changes, just some internal changes in this area from schematics through design development, although there were a number of changes in between, and then it went back to this. And next, which is elevations. South elevation, which is the service entrance for staff, for deliveries right here. The volunteer lounge. This is the western facade. Periodicals is here. There's little meeting rooms here, and Carol's along here, young adult. Again, staff volunteer lounge. And next, this is the north facade, which you see from the street. A pop-up clear story here for the children's program room with colored glass in it. And this is the main facade of the building with the entrance to the library and the cafe in here. And this is the children's space. And that's it.